Celebrations like today, as Swamiji writes in the book, this is not a unique event in history. Many masters do appear to their disciples, to their close ones after their passing in flesh and blood form. And it declares a truth, a glorious truth. As the Gita says, that you, the soul, are immortal, imperishable. The soul cannot be cut into pieces. It cannot be withered by the wind. It cannot be drowned by the water. It cannot be hurt. It is eternal. And Christ's resurrection, which today celebrates, is a celebration of the greatness that lies within each one of us. You know, St. Augustine had a beautiful quote, is that men travel far to gaze upon mountain heights, to look at the waves of the sea, to see the broad flowing rivers, to see the expanse of the oceans, and to see the courses of the stars. But they pass by themselves, the crowning wonder. The greatest wonder of this creation is right inside us. It's not out there. And the masters again and again by their lives come to awaken us to that truth, which time and again gets ossified by the power of Maya, by the power of matter. You know, as a Christian, I have grown up, you know, in Ananda, we celebrate more the resurrection, the cross. For much of recorded history, Christianity has celebrated the cross and the suffering of Jesus. And, the suffering still reigns paramount, despite the resurrection. And I too do adore the cross. Because for me, it symbolizes God's love. Yes, you feel the suffering of Christ and what he went through. And so one day, before parting with a friend, I gave my friend a gift, a little cross. And I didn't know how she felt about it. Later, she told me that when she saw the gift, she said, my heart was troubled because the cross denotes suffering for most people. She said, oh my God, I was afraid what the cross is going to bring into my life. And then I had also written a little note which said that the cross symbolizes the love of God for each one of us and how we need to live in this world, how we need to carry God's love in our hearts. So she said, I read your line, and then the whole meaning of the cross changed for me. So while, yes, it does stand for a very difficult moment in history, but remember, friends, why did Christ allow himself to be subject to the power of the world? Before his crucifixion, he tells his disciples, he said, the prince of the world is coming. He has no power over me, but I will do what my Father wants me to do so that the world may know that I love my Father. And when they come to him, this is on Thursday night, when they come to arrest him, he's with a few of his disciples. And Simon Peter, one of his closest disciples, had a sword. He takes the sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest. And Christ rebukes him. He said, those who take the sword will perish by the sword. That even in his moment of suffering, he was not advocating violence. He said, do you think I cannot ask my Father for a legion of angels and protect myself? I'm allowing this to happen because God wants this to happen. This is love. And this is the spirit behind resurrection. The love of God, which gives us the strength to triumph over the cross of suffering, of tests. Ordinary consciousness is centered in ego consciousness. And so we feel the suffering more greatly. But Swamiji reminds us again and again in his commentary. He said, the masters rise above the consciousness of the ego. Yes, Christ suffered, but his suffering was not that great. His greatest suffering, he said, was for the ignorance of man. That just like a parent who had so much love to give his children and who wanted to guide his children from going astray, but the child wouldn't allow him. His sorrow was that people would suffer when they didn't need to suffer, that he was sent into the world to lift people into the glory of their own being, into the bliss of a heightened awareness. But people would not allow him to. And so that was the Christ's sorrow. That is the Master's sorrow, that we do not allow them to help us. There are many lessons to be learned from the crucifixion. I also want to share one more beautiful story about the cross, which I just shared on Friday. Friday was Good Friday. And this cross remains at home in my place. In my living room, there's no sunlight that enters the house. A little bit comes in the bedroom and a little bit comes in the kitchen, but no sunlight in the, at least so far I have not seen until Good Friday. So in the evening before the meditation, I just kept the cross at the door, so that when I would come up to 401, this place for the meditation, I would just bring the cross along as well to prepare for Easter. And I was doing my energization exercises in the brief time that was there. And suddenly I just saw that there is light shining on the cross. It was evening, the sunset. I just looked and I was wondering, from where is this light coming? And there's a little portion of the sky that I can see from the door, and a golden little cloud had positioned itself there and was beaming on the cross. It was so sweet. I saw it, and then a few seconds later, the light was gone. It was just so touching that even nature honors the cross for what it symbolizes. Suffering need not symbolize God's anger or punishment for us. In fact, it is God's way of awakening his sons. He does not want us to suffer. We choose suffering by staying in a lower consciousness, by staying rooted in ego consciousness, by allowing matter to hold its sway over our consciousness. That's why we suffer. Like I said, there are many lessons from the crucifixion. Christ, again, before crucifixion, he has a long talk with his disciples, and it's very inspiring. He says, in this world, you will have trials and tribulations. But he says, be of good cheer, because his disciples were troubled for what was to come. He says, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. And he was saying, if I have overcome, you can overcome. And how do you overcome the world? It can only be overcome by love. And that is why Christ again and again, as he says, the prince of this world has no power over me. But when you look at the crucifixion, where people spit on him, beat him up, it is said that they hung him all night, before the crucifixion without allowing him to rest, and put a crown of thorns over his head, and he would not utter a word. Why? Simply because he knew God's will was playing through his life. But before the crucifixion, we have our humanity too. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, in Mountain of Olives, he was praying to God for strength to go through what was to come. He knew what was to come. And he keeps praying, closing his prayers with, Lord, if thou wilt, let this cup pass from me. He prays 3 times. The disciples who accompanied him, they were heavy with slumber. They were sleeping. He wanted them to pray for him, but they did not have the strength. It's another principle. Often we experience it in our own life. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. We want to aspire towards heightened state of awareness, towards lofty goals. But what happens? Our flesh is weak. Our willpower, the power of our flesh, the heaviness of matter rules over us. I am tired. I'm sleepy. And so often we allow ourselves to subject ourselves to the power of matter. And that is why Yoganandaji's exercises, energization exercises, he would say, use your willpower. Do not allow your body to dictate to you what you can and what you cannot do. So the masters come again and again to tell us, rise. Even if you fall temporarily, rise. So he goes back again, second time to pray. Lord, if thou wilt, let this cup pass. Comes back again, the disciples are still sleeping. He goes back again to pray. Lord, if thou wilt, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. There's a very heartrending truth here. This is the only way for us to overcome the world. Not our will, but thy will. Again and again, we must remind ourselves, friends. Otherwise, we keep climbing down into that abyss where there is not going to be any glory, where there is not going to be any freedom. The freedom with which Christ offered himself. And it is said, astral beings came and strengthened him in his prayer as he was praying. They came and gave him strength to, for the crucifixion that lay ahead. Yet he comes back the third time, they are still sleeping. But very compassionate, he says, come, they are here. And, a few feet away, they were already there, ready to arrest him. And one of his disciples, Simon Peter, impulsive, bold, courageous, very inspired. They're all inspired when Jesus is with them. And he would say, I'll go to the ends of the world for you. Christ, I lay down my life for you. And Jesus tells him, before the cock crows 3 times today, before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And it happened. As he was being taken, beaten, dragged towards the high priest, a lady saw Simon Peter standing there and said, hey, weren't you with this man? He says, no, I wasn't with, I don't know him. And it happened thrice. He was waiting, he and John were waiting to see. And the third time he denied Christ, the cock crowed. And Christ looks at Peter. And Peter is overcome by his weakness. He goes out and he weeps. But so must we weep for ourselves who are not able to overcome the heaviness of Maya. But Christ, the compassion of Christ and God and the masters is that they know. All we need to do is offer ourselves again and again into their hands. Master said, Yoganandaji said, the greatest lesson of Christ came from his cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The whole of nature revolted against the crucifixion. We say, yes, he didn't suffer, and yet he did suffer. Why? Because his consciousness pervaded all of creation. The moment it was time for him to leave his body, the skies darkened, thunder. The curtains of the temple were torn into 2, and rocks cleaved open. And in St. Assisi, in the shrine of St. Francis at La Verna, there is a rock still which had cleaved open at the time of the crucifixion. Why? The nature itself, he was one with everything that was. Remember Lahiri Mahashaya crying out in ecstasy when he was in ecstasy and he was one with everything. He said, I am drowning off the coast of Japan. He's not so much in pain as the ones who are drowning, but he is aware of it. Aware of it for him to say, I am drowning in the bodies of all those souls. So Christ is aware of the pain that is inflicted on him. But however, his consciousness is not rooted in the ego. What happens when the consciousness is rooted in the ego and we're suffering? We seek sympathy. We seek understanding. We seek compassion from others for ourselves. And Swamiji again and again draws our attention to the truth that Christ on the cross, his compassion was for everyone else. His compassion was for the suffering that was to come to the people who did this to him. Yoganandaji would later say that the Holocaust that the Jews endured was the suffering for what the Jews did to Christ. So the law of karma works infallibly. So at the same time, just beside Christ, 2 robbers were also crucified. One was arrogant. He said, you are a master. You have done so many miracles. Why can't you save yourself and save us also? And the other one was humble. He said, watch how you talk. He is a master. Today, if you will, we can be with him in paradise. Ask him for forgiveness. I'm paraphrasing, I forget it, but it's very sweet. The humility of the other man. And he prays to Jesus, forgive me, Lord. And he says, at least we are crucified for our sins. But this man has no sin. And he prays to Jesus, forgive us. for what we have done, but take us with you. And Christ says, today you will be with me in paradise. The compassion of God, when we approach them with humility, they bring their blessings. His sin was forgiven. I want to read a beautiful story during the filming of Jesus of Nazareth. It is one of those remarkable movies. And there is a centurion during Christ's ministry. The centurion had an adopted son who was a slave, but he had adopted him as his son. And his son was not feeling well. And Christ had healed his son. And during the crucifixion, he was appointed by the Roman officials to stand watch over the crucifixion. So the actor who is playing the role of the centurion, his name is Ernest. And so I'm going to read as it was. So there is a story about Ernest, the actor who played the Roman centurion in the film Jesus of Nazareth. When time came for the filming of the crucifixion scene, the camera was to be only on Ernest, looking up at Jesus on the cross. So it was not necessary for the actor playing Jesus to be there. Instead, the film's director, Franco Zeffirelli, put a chalk mark on the cross where Ernest was to look. So they were going to film Ernest, and he just had to look at that place, assuming that Christ is on the cross. Ernest asked for someone to read aloud the words that Jesus had uttered as he hung on the cross. Zeffirelli found a Bible and signaled for the camera to start rolling. As Zeffirelli began reading Christ's words aloud, Ernest stared up at that chalk mark, thinking what might have gone through the centurion's mind at that moment. And the thought enters him, that poor man up there, I met him when he healed my servant, who is like a son to me. Jesus says he's the Son of God, an unfortunate claim during these perilous times. But I know he is innocent of any crime. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The voice was Zeffirelli's, but the words burned into Ernest. The words of Jesus, forgive me, Father, for even being here, was the centurion's prayer that formed his thoughts. I am so ashamed, so ashamed. Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise, said Jesus to the thief hanging next to him. And again the thoughts form in Ernest's mind. If Jesus can forgive that criminal, then he will forgive me. I will lay down my sword and retire to my little farm outside of Rome. As Ernest stared upward, instead of the chalk mark, he suddenly saw the face of Jesus Christ, lifelike and clear. The most beautiful, gentle visage he had ever known, pain-seared, sweat-stained, with blood flowing down from thorns pressed deep, his face was still filled with compassion. He looked down at him through tragic, sorrowful eyes with an expression of love beyond description. Then his cry rose against the desert wind, not the voice of Zeffirelli reading from the Bible, but the voice of Jesus himself he heard. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. In awe, he watched Jesus' head slump to one side and knew that he was dead. A terrible grief welled up within, and completely oblivious of the camera, Ernest started sobbing uncontrollably, and they cut the scene. Ernest later wrote, I know it was a profound spiritual experience, and I have not been quite the same person since. I take my faith more seriously. I like to think that I'm more forgiving than I used to be. As that centurion learned thousands of years ago, I too have found that you simply cannot change, you simply cannot come close to Jesus without being changed. And this is true of all masters. Every moment even on the cross, was a lesson. Into thy hands I commend my spirit. His work was done. He had fulfilled the will of God, and he offered himself back to his Father. It was a revolutionary ministry, very short, 33 years. His ministry itself was 3 years. The consciousness of the masses and the consciousness of Christ was, as it is said in the scriptures, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. There was simply no understanding. When they would challenge him, he would tell them many things which was simply ununderstandable, even to the priests. The priests were more ignorant, one might say, than the masses. At one time he said, destroy this temple in 3 days and I will raise it up. And they thought he was talking about the temple in Jerusalem, which had taken many years to build. And you say, are you saying that this temple, which has taken years and many of our ancestors to build, that you will build it in 3 days? And they would take up stones to throw at him. And again, he would, I and my Father are one. And they would find it blasphemous that you're calling yourself God. And Christ would remind them, is it not written in your scriptures that ye are gods? It was Kali Yuga. But friends, we want to keep this in mind. As Patanjali says in in his Yoga Sutras, Demystifying Patanjali, Swamiji and Master's commentary on it. He says in the Yoga Sutra, if you miss the point, it is your responsibility. Just because it is Kali Yuga and the consciousness is dark, or we can't help it, we can't simply understand, does not absolve you. But the understanding of religion had strayed so far that people simply could not recognize God in form. His disciples would ask him, and whenever he would talk to his disciples, he would say, Father, God, and they would say, Lord, you talk to us so much about the Father. Show us how the Father looks. What is he like? And Christ would say, have I been with you so long and you still ask, show me the Father? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. That the Guru is God in human form. To enter into this plane of duality, even God needs the instrument of the ego. Even he needs to take on the flesh. But look at the blindness of man. That the eyes cannot see, the ears cannot hear the voice of God that's right in front of you, speaking to you, helping you awaken. Your free will is an important determinant in your destiny. Truth is always persecuted in this world of Maya. That's the role of Maya. That's the purpose of Maya, to take you away from God. But there is an opposing force of God that is also bringing you back. If you're not aligning with you, there is no standing stationary. Either you're going here or you're going there. So if you're not consciously choosing God, where are you going? Towards Maya. So this is very important. Your thoughts, your awareness, your ambitions, your aspirations, let them be founded in God. There is no reality beyond that. That is what the Christ and Masters come to tell us through their life. This is all a dream. But this dream can be a very difficult dream. 3 days, 3 nights. Master writes, 3 days and 3 nights is what it takes usually the masters to transcend the causal, the astral, and the material elements of the body. And that is then the resurrection on the 3rd day. And there was no body. That Mary Magdalene, one of his close disciples, came to see the body so they could take it away. There was no body. She couldn't find a body because Christ had resurrected, and there was an angel at the door of the tomb. And he said, why are you looking for the living among the dead? He had risen. And again, another lesson Swamiji writes. And so his disciples, you can imagine, they were worried, they were scared, they were fearful. So they're all gathered together for fear of the Jews. And Christ comes into their midst and says, "Peace be unto you." And Swamiji reminds us that is the fruit of rising above your tests. That unless we overcome our tests in divine consciousness, we will not experience inner freedom, joy, peace. If you want a peace that lasts, if you want joy that lasts, if you want to feel an ascension of love in your heart, God needs to be part of your overcoming. And it is His strength that will help you to overcome. You need to invite the masters. You need to invite the power of God. Don't think you can do it on your own. You may try your best and do something on your own, but it will leave you very bitter if you notice. For the rest of your life, you will be talking about the difficult time that you had. As Master would say, a devotee was talking about an operation she had 20 years ago, just as though it had happened just yesterday. See, and we become bitter. Why did this happen to me? Why did God do this to me? Or you blame other people for your woes. But when we overcome our tests with the faith and courage, knowing that for some reason or the other, this is God's will that is playing out in front of you. And can we summon faith in His will as Christ did? Nevertheless, this is difficult, Lord, but not my will. Let your will be done. And the fruit of such overcoming is peace, divine peace, inner freedom, compassion for others rather than bitterness and anger towards others, compassion for others. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. They know not what they do. It's a very deep prayer. Of course, on a physical level, they knew what they were doing. They were given chances. Do we really want to crucify this man? Pilate said, "I see no sin in this man." And they said, "Off with him. We do not want him." We can be so sure of our opinions, friends. We can be those Pharisees and Sadducees in the firmness of our opinions and the sense of righteousness that I know. We can all be those Pharisees and Sadducees, those priests, the priestly authorities of those time that cannot see God's will trying to accomplish something else. God is subtle. He does not scream from the rooftops. Christ declared Himself, "I am the Messiah." He said, those who haven't understood get a less beating, but now they have a responsibility because I revealed myself to them and they still rejected me. When you know the truth and you choose not to fulfill its power, then the law of karma to that degree is greater because your awareness, because you chose to reject it. It is not in ignorance. In ignorance also, Master said, if you hit your dream head against a dream wall, you will still feel the dream pain. Right? So this is a dream, yes. This is not real, but our consciousness is still stuck in this dream. So we first have to lift our consciousness outside this dream. In the consciousness of God, you have freedom. And in that consciousness, you can see. As Yogananda ji would say, when he saw the monks coming from a distance, he said, "I see you all as images of light. The bushes, the trees, each one of you. You have no idea how beautiful everything is. The common consciousness cannot see it because we are not in the consciousness of God. But the consciousness that is in God sees the light and would have seen the light of Jesus. But the consciousness that was not in God persecutes that light. And you and me are given these sacred teachings to remind ourselves again and again, get on God's side. Awaken to a higher consciousness. Don't be lazy. It takes willpower. It is easy. The temptations of Maya are very easy to succumb to. It does not require too much energy. So lift your energy, lift your willpower. The masters are by your side. Yogananda ji said 75% of their help is with you. All you need to do is do your part. And so let us celebrate this beautiful day, friends, by reminding ourselves. I'll go back to that quote of St. Augustine. Enjoy this world and the grandness of this world, but remember, grander than anything is that which is within you. The glory of God is within you, waiting to be awakened. And the world can shine with that light. I'll remind that story of Babaji, a devotee had. He was asking Babaji, there's so much disharmony and sadness in this world. Babaji, but this is your world. You can do anything. You can take away the sadness. Won't you take away the sadness? Won't you take away the strife, the fighting? And Babaji said, I cannot take away the sadness, but I can share the light. I can add light to this world. And you and me are those channels through which they add light into this world. So choose to be an instrument for God than an instrument for Maya. I want to close with Master's message for us for Easter. Yogananda ji. This was published in 1935. Very poetic. The little wavelet of Christ's life played helpfully over the bosom of the cosmic life for a while. And then it vanished within the ocean's tenderness, not to die, but to be fed with eternal ambrosia and to come back again to declare the immortality of its tiny existence. The ocean of God throbbed once more in the resurrected Prince Jesus. Flowers fade, never to return. But Jesus only slept to obey the sweet command of nature and woke again to declare his mastery over her. Jesus has silenced the laughter of unbelieving eyes and the audacious poetic assertion that no traveler has ever returned from death's bourne by coming back from the place from which no one ever returned before. With the return of Jesus to this mundane domain, a hope was resurrected in the hearts of 1,000 million mortals. The hope that they too could wipe away the sting of death from their breasts of everlastingness. Christ hid himself again to show that he could not only resurrect his eternalness in the body of Jesus, but also in every blossom and in every living being that would ever smile in the garden of creation through endless eons. Banish the death consciousness perceived during the sleep of delusion, and resurrect your soul in the ever-reigning light of immortality. Let this be your Easter awakening. We will now do a little exercise. We will hand out a little sheet of paper to you. Whatever weakness or strength you're trying to develop, write it on that sheet of paper. And on this day, celebrating the resurrection of the soul, offer it into the fire of the masters of spirit and draw on their strength, their power, to give you strength to rise above the limitations of your ego self and to ascend into the immortal spirit that is within you.